Thank you for listening in to another episode of Conversations with Alison J, The Journey to Here. Please remember to subscribe, hit the like button and share. Thank you for joining me on Conversations with Alison J, The Journey to Here. I'm your host, Alison J. Today, I'm delighted to welcome our guest, Carrie Wynn. Carrie is a writer and a relationship coach. She created a blog as a safe space for honest dialogue around relationships, overcoming narcissistic abuse, cultivating boundaries, and working through traumas. Carrie spent the first part of her life with a complete belief that her worth could only come from someone else. I'm sure many of us can identify with that. She didn't have boundaries and tolerated toxic behavior from both friends and relationships under the pretense of love. It was when she began to work through her past trauma, she identified why she had struggled with a lack of self-love and worth. It took an almost detrimental relationship to wake her up and force her to realize that if she didn't make changes, her life would continue to look the same. That was many years ago. And now Carrie is here and happy to tell us, as hard and as painful as it can be to work through the things we don't want to face, that it is worth it to come out on the other side healthy, healed, and whole. Hello, Carrie, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Allison. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Oh, great stuff. Well, Carrie, I reached out to you after I read your blog. I spent 6 years holding out for a man who was emotionally unavailable. And I saw the title, and to be honest, I really didn't even need to read any further because it just said everything. Because I'm sure that A, you're definitely not alone in that. And B, if we look at the other side, some of us are the emotionally unavailable ones. And if I honest, put my hands up, I know there's been times when I have been both sides of the same coin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and to be honest, I have so many questions, Carrie. I'm probably going to go 100 words a minute. So please forgive me because I'm just so excited to delve into this topic and conversation. Now, how did you find yourself involved with somebody that was emotionally unavailable? When did you realize that the person was emotionally unavailable? How did you end it? Or did you even end it? Are you still in it? I mean, just all these questions, Carrie. So sorry. So,
No,
Carrie.
I love it. I love it. Yes. And you are not alone. I don't know if you went through, there's so many comments on that article, but a lot of people are sharing very similar stories. Some are still in it, or many people are saying, I've been in this for 20 years. So I think that we're definitely not alone. I'm going to kind of work back from your questions. First off, no, I am not still in it, thankfully. I actually have been with my partner for about 4 years now. I'm in the first healthy and long-term relationship of my life, and we can get more into that later. But how did I, 6 years? It's so crazy to think about. So when I met James, quote unquote, I had actually we had grown up in the same small town, and I had known him prior to that. So we had been, I would say, friends, not super close, but I had just gotten back from a year in Australia. And that I had just gone through a breakup, and I, looking back, was not in a good emotional place. I had been with someone who had ended up cheating on me when we were actually talking about marriage. I came back to the States, and then I ran into James at our local gym. I was in between cities, and he ended up getting my number and was like, let's go to dinner. We ended up going to dinner. And then he was moving across the country, and we ended up staying in touch. And then it just kind of snowballed, and it was kind of a pattern, kind of the same pattern for years, where we would text all the time. We would have Skype calls. We would talk on the phone, and we never dated, but it was constantly if we were in the same city, because we were from the same hometown, we would see each other. At times we would just have dinner as friends because I was in a relationship. He, to this day, I don't believe has been with anyone since his first marriage. So he was briefly married when he was very young. I don't know if anyone from a small town can relate to this. Most people I know are on their second or third marriages right now from, you know, you get married at 16, 17, 18, and then a lot of people get divorced by 22. And then just kind of the pattern continues because that's just what you know. But we stayed in touch, and it was just so confusing for me because I never really had a relationship like that where it seemed like he didn't want anything more from me, which I think for me, it was a challenge. And so I built it up in my head for years where I was like, it was romantic. We did have chemistry, but ultimately looking back, we were not a good fit. He's very introverted, and like I'm a very extroverted person. I love doing things. I love being with friends. He would absolutely hate that. Like if I actually think about combining our lives, it never would have worked, but it just, I don't know. I think I built it up in my head, and we did have a lot of things in common because we were friends. So I think it was easy to kind of blur those lines, but we would continually go through the same pattern where we would talk all the time. We would Skype. He would take me out to dinners. I believe I wrote about this in the story, but at one point he drove 8 hours to see me just for dinner. And I was like, why would someone do that if he wasn't interested? Like, I love my friends, but I would not do that for a friend. I wouldn't be like, oh, okay, you're in the city.
Yeah, it would have to be like some kind of real emergency.
Yes. And this wasn't. I was just in the city, and he was like, oh, okay, I'll come see you and your friend for dinner. It was just like so nice to see him. There were times he would bring me flowers. And then we would get close and he would panic and push me away. And he would always, be like, I never said we were anything more. I never said I wanted anything more. And I would continue the cycle because it was just, unhealthy behavior. And we even said it wasn't healthy. I remember talking to him numerous times being like, oh, we can't do this forever. This isn't going to be healthy when we're older. And then it got to a certain point where I was like, okay, we're older.
And we're still doing it.
We're still doing it. And I think it kind of coincided with the relationship that I spoke about where it was detrimental, and we can get more into that as well. But I dated someone who ended up having narcissistic personality disorder. He was very abusive. Both physically and emotionally. And I saw James right at the tail end of that relationship. And I remember feeling very vulnerable, and he made me feel very safe because at that point, he was a friend to me. And that was actually the last time I ever saw James. So I saw him, he was like, you got to get out of this relationship. And I just realized I was like, I am letting men treat me terribly. Even if they don't know it, some of them I think know it, some of them don't, but I am letting myself be treated so terribly, and it's just going to continue. And so there was I didn't tell James I am done. It wasn't dramatic. There was no moment. I just started working on myself. And as I did that, I stopped responding to him as much. I stopped talking to him on the phone. And then part of me doesn't want to say this because I feel like this isn't how life always goes. But there was a moment a couple of years ago where he called me and he said, I think he saw I was in a happy relationship. I kind of moved on. I think he kind of realized, that could have possibly been something. And he just said, I wish I would have dated you. And I was like, you know what? I do. Part of me does too, but it wouldn't have worked out. And that ship has sailed. So part of me is kind of like, booyah. But the other part of me was just, I don't know. Part of me was very sad because I'm like, I think he's so closed off and I hope he finds someone. But in 6 years, I never saw any change in him.
Wow.
It's like he opened up and would close off every time.
That whole hot and cold, right?
Oh, for 6 years.
Yeah.
But right. It wasn't malicious by any means. I don't think that I think he would realize what he was doing and pull back, but I think he also was lonely. And I think that he did like me, but I think at the end of the day, he couldn't give what I needed. And he knew that, so he'd pull away. I knew that, but didn't want to admit it. So I keep on chasing. And it was just a cycle. And I say 6 years, it may have been more 7 or 8. Okay. If I actually look back, it was a very long time.
And it's interesting that you say it wasn't malicious, because I think that's something that's very important to note, that not everybody that is emotionally unavailable is doing it out of maliciousness or even because they're abusive. A lot of it is because of the pain and the trauma they themselves have gone through. So they've closed themselves off. However, because they still yearn for it, they do make that move to come forward towards a person that they feel a connection with. Then they get scared and then they pull back. And I think it's really important to note that it's not always malicious behavior, because I know, for example, I've been involved with somebody that I believe to be emotionally unavailable, but he is actually the nicest, sweetest person when you're in his company, perfect gentleman, caring, loving, affectionate. But because of what he had gone through, tends to pull back when he feels himself getting close. And I can safely say there's never ever been anything abusive or malicious in his behavior. So you could clearly see it was just a thing of past hurts, past trauma that he hasn't worked through, he hasn't gotten past. And for that reason, I think sadly has closed himself off to the possibilities of some really great relationships.
I agree. And yeah, it's so true. It's not malicious. And I think at times that can make it harder
Mm.
because there is no abuse. You know what I mean? Like it's even, and I don't want to say it's harder because it's like abuse is terrible. Like I'm not going to sugarcoat that, but it's just very confusing. And like it is, I think at times manipulative, even if they don't realize it,
Yeah.
but I don't think it's malicious.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And to your point, we're not sugarcoating abuse in any way, shape, or form. However, I think the difference is, let's put it that way, let's call it a difference, is that if it's we're in a case where somebody's been abusive, you have something tangible to say, I'm going to leave because of this. But when it's a case of somebody is not abusive and they are that sweet, kind, loving, caring person, it makes, sometimes you stop to think, well, you know, they are nice, they are caring. So what's the problem? Is it me? Is it? And sometimes it will make you question yourself,
Yes.
because you look at it, because you can't quite put your finger on the thing it is as to why you should leave, until you realize that, you know, something emotionally, this person cannot give me what I need. And what's even more sad than that is they emotionally are not giving themselves what they need. And I think that's, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, where the differences are between leaving because of abuse and it not being abuse. It's so, it does make it more of a struggle and a challenge, because you think, am I making this up? Because this is a nice guy. He treats me nicely. We do things together. We talk, but then their heart is just like barricaded in some castle somewhere.
No, I think that's so true. And also, I think that a lot of people end up with in relationships with people who are emotionally unavailable. I don't think it's something where, in my case, we never were monogamous or exclusive, but in a lot of cases, you know, I know people who've gotten married and were emotionally unavailable. Like
Wow.
personally, I saw that in my now divorced parents' marriage. I saw a very distant relationship, which I think kind of spearheaded me or pushed me to go after that in men for a very long time. I think it was interesting. It was exciting. It was a challenge because you're constantly, you know, vying for that love. You're like, I can either one, fix them, or two, eventually they're going to fall in love with me. And I think we see that in the media as well.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I remember, and again, I put this in a blog that I had written I think I wrote it for Valentine's Day, and it's called Live Again, Love Again, Don't Shut the Door. And one of the things that I mentioned in there is I remember going to my cousin. She passed away about 5 years ago, bless her heart. And she was just yelling at me because I was telling her about another situationship, let me call it that, that I'd gotten myself involved.
Complicated for any
You know,
millennials.
I was telling her about this guy that I'd gotten involved with that had like more than 8 children with more than 4 different women. Yeah. And yeah, for real. And I was just gushing about this guy, and she's like, cuz, oh God, I just miss her so terribly. She's like, cuz, and she just went in on me, telling me about, look, another one, the one before that, and not, and she was just basically not to make me feel bad about myself, but to say, look at the relationships you've been in. Not when was the last time you were in a healthy one? And
What do you say?
and to your point about what you saw in your parents, I think a lot of us repeat cycles that we're not even aware of because we've seen it in our family. And so that's the example that was, well, example may be the wrong word, but that's what we saw. So that's what we then mimicked. And I remember, and that same cousin, she gave me a book many years ago, and it was, I can't remember, I can't remember her name correctly, but it was called Are You the One for Me? And it was a doctor talking about why we get into the kinds of relationships we do. I think her name's something like Dr. Barbara Angelis or something like that. And I didn't even finish the first chapter before I wanted to just literally throw the book away because it was hitting home.
Yeah. You're like, I'm not ready for this.
Yeah. And it was talking about, for example, people that get involved in relationships with a person that is an addict because maybe they saw something in their family and they couldn't fix their mother or their father. So now they're going into this relationship in the hope that they can fix this person. And I looked at it and I just thought, wow, wow. And then she went on to put different scenarios in there where people get into this type of relationship because maybe this is what they saw in the home. And you could look at it, and I think pretty much any kind of scenario that you could think of as to why, and the kind of relationships people have gotten into and why, the driving force behind it that we do not realize at the time. She mentioned it, and that really made me stop and think about the relationships I've had and how I actually saw myself in these relationships, because I realized that, yeah, they say opposites attract and so on and so forth. But I saw what was about me that attracted these types of relationships to me, the brokenness within me that attracted these situationships, relationships, entanglements, whatever you want to call them. How I saw the reflection of myself in them. And I think if a lot more people were honest, they would be able to look at some of the relationships they've had and say, you know something, yeah, I see the parts of me that attracted that brought that to me, the unhealthy parts, the broken parts of me that brought that to me. I mean, what do you think, Carrie?
Oh, I agree with you. But also, and I know that you touched on this briefly when we first started talking, but being emotionally unavailable yourself and like kind of going through different phases happens all the time. And I know that and I remember this was, I'm going to say last year of college, and I had just used Tinder for the first time. And I was like, I'm going to try this new dating app thing. Not for me. It works out for some people, but I was like, eh. But I actually ended up going on a date with the nicest guy who had like he was talking about his family. He was handsome. He was honestly great. And I remember sitting there thinking in my head, like, he's too healthy for me, or like I was like, I don't want to be with someone with that perfect family and he's got everything together. And I genuinely I pushed him away because I was like, I don't want, like, I was like, you're too good for me. And I remember being like, after that, I dated this really broken person. And I think that I genuinely was so emotionally unavailable, because even thinking back, like I went through phases. Yes, I yearned for someone maybe that I couldn't have, but I also dated people who were great, and I wasn't emotionally available. And I would also get bored very quickly. And I think it's because I wasn't really there.
Yeah.
And I think that, yeah, I think that it's just funny to think back and realize, wow, my behaviors, like it was very predictable in a way how my relationships would go. And even if it was a different kind of person, each relationship would have the same pattern. It would go for 6 months to a year. Things would end. I would start dating someone else. I would find, I would jump all in head first and then pull back. Things would end. It was like clockwork. And I would have friends that would, joke, or they obviously in a loving way, they were kind of like, you're like the serial monogamous of like all our friends. And it was like clockwork. And I just couldn't, I don't know. I couldn't stay in a relationship. And I think that it also led me to pursue people who weren't really there, because it was more exciting. The moment that someone really committed, I was out.
Bit like that movie Runaway Bride with Julia Roberts, right?
Like that movie.
You
That's one of my
see it,
favorites.
you want it, because otherwise she wouldn't have made it at least to the
altar
church on all of the occasions.
Spoilers. I'm just kidding if anyone hasn't seen it by now.
And I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because a lot of people would more associate emotional unavailability with men, because as far as they're concerned, women, our hearts are just open and overflowing and outpouring, right? And so a lot of people would not actually stop to think that, yes, there's a lot of us as women who are also emotionally available. It may look differently because we are the ones that like, oh, well, we'll go and say, yes, we want the relationship and all the rest of it. However, with us, the emotional unavailability may manifest itself in a way where, as you were mentioning, nice guy, checked every single box, healthy relationships, healthy examples of relationships. And you're looking at that, it's like, oh yeah, but no.
No.
And I think what it is as well, because you mentioned about society, we always want the bad boy, right? So the good guy always.
We don't, but then we all, I feel like almost everyone has to date one to learn her lesson, or 10. Like,
I know, right? Just because if you think about it, because where did I even hear that? I'm sure it was like in a magazine or a movie. Good guys finish last, good girls finish last.
I mean, that's been for decades.
Right. We always want the bad boy. But when we look at it in its bare naked reality, it's not necessarily the bad boy, it's the emotional unavailable person, isn't it?
And I have to say this because I've been rewatching it. It's my guilty pleasure. I know there's issues with it, but I've been rewatching Sex and the City. And I know, Carrie ends up with the person that was emotionally unavailable for the entire show.
Right.
Like there's almost no healthy relationships in that entire show. And it's just, it's glorified. And I think it's one of those things where it's like, oh, she finally gets him. Right. He marries other people, but she finally gets him. And it's so, when you actually strip it back, it's so unhealthy.
You know what? That's interesting that you should say that, because if we look at it, oh my gosh, wow. Well, as you say that, yes, because Mr. Big, and everybody was, and how was everybody rooting for Mr. Big? In fact, to be honest, I wasn't. You know who I was rooting for? Aiden.
I know, but what's interesting is that, I mean, obviously, but he was also not right for her. It was just interesting because it seemed like no one was ever right. I mean, I think looking back, she was also extremely toxic, but if you look back, like he wanted to change her, and then Big was emotionally unavailable. And I think if it were to be written today and like by someone who was a little more involved in feminism as a whole, it'd be like, maybe some of the girls didn't end up with a man. But at the end, that seemed like the end goal, which was interesting for a show that was so focused on female friendship.
Yeah, that is true, because they all did end up, apart from Samantha, the most emotionally unavailable character just ever to hit the history of anything ever, anywhere, yes. Right? Samantha, right? True. Because when you think about it, it's so true. And most of us have watched, and if we haven't heard of Sex in the City, Sex in the City. So yeah, oh my gosh, Carrie, uh, aptly named Carrie. Just
Yes, I
say.
know. I would like to think that I relate more with anyone else. But no, I was actually going to tell a story. I want to say it before I forget it because I think it ties into this so well. But I was talking to a friend and she is beautiful. She is driven. She is successful. She is like fit and amazing and just everything that you could ever want in a partner. And she, ever since I've known her, has always dated the most emotionally unavailable men on the planet, to where they will string, it will go on for years. They'll never be monogamous. And she finally got to a point and she recently reached out to me and was like, I realize it's coming from me. And like, I'm not emotionally available and I have to work through this. And she just started therapy and I am so proud of her. But it's just something where for years I've watched it. I'm like, what's going on here? I'm like, because you of all people should be, go like this and have a great relationship because you have so much to offer. And then it turns out that all along she's been the one as well, where she's like, I'm closed off. So I'm pursuing people who are closed off.
That is interesting. Very, very interesting. Back to the point of it's not just men. That
No,
would be the first assumption that are emotionally available. There are a lot of walking wounded women who are emotionally available, but to the naked eye, because they have the whole package, the material package, nobody's stopping to look at, do you have the full emotional package? And to be honest, as you get older, we're going to realize nobody's going to have the full emotional package because we're all going to have gone through stuff.
we all have baggage,
Right.
but it's
However,
about, are we working through that baggage?
but exactly, exactly. Hence the title of my book, Pack Your Luggage, but Leave Your Baggage. So
Sign me up. Pre-ordering now.
thank you, man. And so, but that's what it is. If you think about it, we have to, because we're all gonna have baggage as we go through life. And a quote in one of my books is, in that same book, is we are all going to have baggage. The key is finding someone or being connected with people that love us enough that's going to help us unpack it.
I agree.
And as you get older, the chances are you're both going to have baggage. So if you can come together in that union where you can help each other unpack,
Yep. And
because
also willingness
mm,
to unpack.
we're not saying that it's always going to be one person emotionally unavailable and the other. No, as you get older and you go through stuff in life, things are going to happen, and we're going to be war weary and wary of getting involved, and we're going to be a lot more guarded. So
When you've been hurt that many times.
yeah, well, Carrie, like, but I just want to go to something that you mentioned in your website as well. In your website, you say you spent the first part of your life with a complete belief that your worth could only come from other people, and that you didn't have boundaries and you tolerated toxic behaviors in friendships and relationships under the pretense of love. And when I read that, it reminded me of a childhood friend of mine. And as you're growing up, you don't really have that maturity to know what a toxic friendship is, because people think that there's only toxic, intimate relationships, right? But I remember some things had happened and so on, and we hadn't spoken in years, and then a mutual friend passed away, and we were at the funeral. And because people always saw me as the loud, boisterous, rambunctious one, and so we were all sitting at a table, and she decided, nobody told her, force or anything, to sit away from the group. So everybody looked at it like, oh, Alison, you're so wicked, you're so mean because she's over there by herself. And I says, wait, what? Hold on now. Wait, people, I didn't tell her she couldn't come over here and sit here. B, I said hello and greeted her when I first saw her. So see, the fact that she's sitting over there, that's the choice she made to separate herself. And because I didn't want to go into it, all I remember saying, and this is what, probably about 20 years ago or so now, I remember saying this. And I said, you know, the same way you can have toxic, intimate relationships, you can also have toxic friendships. And this just happened to be one. I don't wish her harm. I don't wish her anything bad in life. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't have a conversation with her should she decide to join the group. She chose to separate herself. And that's when it first dawned on me that it's not just intimate relationships that can be toxic. It can be relationships with family members. It can be relationship with friends. It could be with co-workers, colleagues. It could be any relationship that could be toxic. So I say all of that to say, Carrie, what was it for you and that you identified that, okay, I've all this time, I felt that my self-worth and I felt like I could only be happy and I could only be whole if it was connected to somebody else. Because a lot of people need to hear that, because a lot of people, you know, that whole you complete me. No, you don't. You compliment me.
That's wow. That's a lot to unpack. Okay, let me start with, I'll give you a little background. So I grew up and this is not in any way to say that religion and spirituality can't be great in some cases, but I grew up in a very, very controlling and just there was only one like option, one belief. Mm-hmm. I didn't really have my own voice. I was told from a very young age what I was supposed to believe. I was given a purity ring. I was told I had to wait for my husband before I could like really go on with life. I was never encouraged as far as really any educational path or anything of those means. So although I worked very hard and I, put myself through college, I instantly, from a very young age was like, I can't wait to find a husband. And I have dozens of diaries where I had this like childhood friend that I was in love with, I'm like 10 years old, but I was like, I'm going to marry him. And I was in love with him for years. And that seemed to be a pattern where I was just like, I'm going to marry him. I'm going to be like so happy. I'm going to be the best wife. I'm going to do this and that. And I just felt like I needed to find someone to love me. And I felt so alone and unloved for a very long time. And I didn't grow up in like the worst environment. My parents were very distant at times. They were very emotionally unavailable. I think that contributed to some of my patterns. But ultimately, I just was like, I just believed in true love. And some of that came from, the media, books I read, but I was a hopeless romantic. Mm-hmm. Like I would, dream about it. I would write stories. I think that's where my writing definitely started. I would, dream, and it just all led to me meeting someone that had narcissistic personality disorder. And I was the perfect candidate for a victim. Like I was perfect because I think he could sense that about me. And he told me, after a couple of weeks, he was like, I've been waiting my whole life for you. He's like, you are everything I've ever wanted. Like, we're meant to be together. Like this is, and for someone like my whole life, I'd wanted to hear those words. Even if I didn't realize it, I had conditioned myself to need those words from another person. And so, it was like butterflies, explosions, like I found my purpose. And then, from there, it turned down this path of abuse and just the most toxic relationship of my entire life. But that was when I realized that it had been a pattern for my whole life and that I was letting everyone in. I realized that I had incredibly toxic friendships. I remember in college, there was a girl that moved across the country because we had briefly worked together at a summer camp and ended up like stalking me. She ended up burning my clothes. And when I asked why she did it, she said, you didn't hang out with me.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I had numerous kind of experiences like that. And there were other ones that weren't as, that was probably the most insane experience but I just couldn't believe, I was like, I didn't hang out with you one night and you burnt my clothes. And then another was I just noticed that I would have a lot of people trying to control me. So I would have friends that were very possessive and controlling. I would have family members who were very possessive and controlling. I started to realize how toxic everything was. And it all came to this head where I just realized I'm letting everything in. And I'm letting good in, but I'm also, because I'm letting everything in, I'm letting, mediocre and bad in as well.
Yeah.
And I just realized at that moment, I was like, I have no boundaries. And I have spent my whole life just needing love from so many people that I'm trying to let it all in. And I just ended up having nothing for myself. I ended up not knowing who I was. I ended up in a like an abusive relationship that I could have died in, to be honest. And it just came to this moment where I feel like I've kind of gone off on a tangent.
No, this
But
is good.
I just realized I had spent my whole life needing and wanting love so much that I, one, had nothing left for myself. And I had a string of I just feel like I wasted a lot of time and a lot of energy. Put it in, I could have put so much of that energy into myself.
But then something that you said struck me, your background and the religious background, and you said that you had trained yourself. Is it that you had trained yourself, or is that what you were fed growing up to believe? Because sometimes I think we're a bit too hard on ourselves, that I trained myself to do this. But
Yeah.
if all you're ever told and taught is this one thing, a lot of that training isn't what you've imposed on yourself. That's the external, because I always talk about internal and external pressures. And
Yeah.
yes, there are those internal pressures, but I think we shouldn't overlook the external pressures that contribute to where a lot of these internal pressures even come from.
That's so true. Yeah. And I think it's also one of those things where, we're in this moment right now where it's like, I am taking responsibility for everything. But you're right. 10 years old, having a adult figure tell you that you need to wait for a man and that your worth is in finding a husband. Like, that was what I was told. My mom also got married very young, 17. So I think it was something where I just thought, like, I remember thinking in my head, if I'm not married by like 21, I felt alive.
Yeah, just but it's that cycle though, isn't it? And it's, as you mentioned, that something just came into my head. Bridgerton. Have you seen Bridgerton?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
hello. So it's like, if we look at how those women were raised in that day, like you said, if they, how distraught they were at not being able to find a suitor. Think
That's
about
what
it.
you
And they
were.
were all really, really young. And Daphne, bless her heart, was married and didn't even know how children were conceived, like,
Oh,
because they were that young, and they weren't told or taught any different or any better. So if you're there, say, at 17 and 21 thinking, oh my gosh, this is what it's going to be, the unfortunate part is that is what we were told, that is what we were taught. We were, and we can't blame the previous generations because they only passed down what they were taught. So
yes.
it is like that cycle, that generational cycle that just continues until somebody raises their head above the parapet and says, hang on a second, no, no, that's just,
Yes.
this isn't all there is. And then you look outside of that and see that, no, if I don't get married by 21, it's not because anything is wrong with me. I read a post, and now, first of all, I heard it in, I don't know, it was some social event, and then I read it again a couple of days ago. This man said, my dad said that if a woman isn't has never been married or had children by the age of 35, something's wrong with her. And I said that, and I just like, can I meet your dad, please? Firstly. And but then, because this was a video I was watching, but the response that the woman gave was just blew me away. Because basically, in the classist way, she was saying your dad's an idiot. So, but she was saying that if a woman hasn't been married by the age of 30 or had children by the age of 35, and going on to list some of the qualities and the things that the woman was doing to be ready. So she was saying that to to enter into a healthy relationship and not just run and rush into something. And so, to your point, that has been the mindset, hasn't it? If a woman isn't married or had children by this age, something must be wrong with her. And so a lot of women have that pressure to think, okay, I need to. And then when a lot of women have grown up in, for want of a better expression, some very naive and sheltered homes, the first person that comes say, like in your case, I've waited my whole life for you. Come on now. We grew up in, I don't know how old you are, but I know for me, my generation, we grew up in the age of, over here in the US, they were called silhouette books. They were all these romance novels with the,
yes.
right. Back in the UK, they were called Mills and Boon. But here in the US, they were called Silhouette. And I remember my mum having a bookshelf full of them.
Of the romantic novels with
Yep.
the damsel in distress and
yeah.
being rescued.
And the picture on the cover was that guy, what's his name? Like that kind of
Fabio.
Yeah. So seriously, look up all those Silhouette books and Mills and Boon. Look, they're all the different kind of scenarios with the maiden and the damsel and that's what we grew up on. That is literally what we grew up on. So therefore, we thought that we were damaged, unhealthy, broken, something wrong if by 22 we were still single.
I know. And we needed to be saved. It's every Disney movie.
And then the savior came in, and we didn't stop to look at who this savior was.
No.
But he said the right things, didn't he? Or in the case of some men, she said the right things, didn't she? And then next thing you know, you're in this thing and it's just like, you're literally in hell.
Yep, you're in hell. And it's just one of those things where, and I don't know if you were, but I was never taught anything. I was taught, don't let someone hit you, right? Like very basic, parental advice, I guess I would say, when it's and I always say this, like, no relationship starts with someone hitting you right out the gates. Exactly. You would never stay. You would not stay. You meet someone, you're on a first date, he like stalks you across the table.
Right? Like, wait, what?
You're out of there. But it's like, usually the physical abuse comes after years of manipulation, psychological abuse, gaslighting. You fall in love in the beginning, everything's perfect. And a lot of people will say it's usually after engagement or marriage is when someone will really turn. And I recently wrote a blog post. It was actually, I think, published yesterday about a podcast called Something Was Wrong, about a woman who ended up getting engaged to a sociopath. And she said the moment that they were engaged, it was like a switch went off and he just instantly changed. And so, and I think it's something where it's easy to ask ourselves, how did they end up in this situation? When you don't understand, if someone's manipulating their entire life, they are going to be masters of their craft, and anyone can fall for it. You can have boundaries, and I think you can get to a place where you can identify those red flags. But unless you do that, and it doesn't matter how successful you are, it doesn't matter how strong you are, it doesn't matter how independent you are, the right person gets under your skin, you're done.
And to your point, going back to something that you mentioned, actually, because I remember I was in a situation where I was in a relationship where it turned out that it was abusive, not that because he was hitting me, but the emotional abuse and manipulation, and which then led to him trying to isolate me and things like that. But like you said, it didn't start that way. It started with him. Oh my gosh, he was just the most amazing, attentive, just everything you could want. Look after me and take me to places, and we spend time together and talk and just all those wonderful things that you want in a relationship. But it was like, what they say, priming the pump, right? And that's what it was. And then when the behavior switched and changed, it was harder to then get out once I started to see, hold on a second. But then part of me was always looking back at the person I first met, because I knew that person was in there and I was waiting for that person to come back, only to realize that person was never really, that was the actor. That play's finished now. This is the real person. And it made me stop and think of something, and you mentioned this earlier, all the healthy relationships that I had let go. 'Cause I just was thinking about it again the other day in preparation for our talk, and thinking, gosh, if I look at a couple of guys that I dated and how their lives are now, and I just like kicking myself a little bit, just like, if I had stayed with this one, would I be divorced? Would I be, do you see what I mean? Because there's two guys that instantly spring to mind. They were good guys. They the example that they had were from a healthy home background and things like that. There was, when I tell you, they literally did tick every single box, nothing wrong with them. It was me. And
You
then
weren't ready. You weren't ready. So it's, you know what I mean? Like you wouldn't have been fully there. And you know what? It might have been a situation where you could have worked on yourself in the relationship, because, and that's another thing. I do not believe that you need to be fully whole. I don't think anyone's fully whole. I think we're
yeah,
always, self-work is ever ongoing,
absolutely.
but you can work on yourself in a relationship, but you may have not been in a place where you could have seen that. You probably would have got in the relationship. They would have been great. You would have just moved on. And then 5 to 10 years, it would have just been an explosion of
Yeah,
this trauma coming
yeah.
out.
Because
But it is hard.
yeah, because to your point, they had examples of like mom and dad and in the home and seeing things like that. I didn't. My background and my upbringing was very different to theirs. So I was more gravitating to what I knew as to be normal, and they were doing what they saw to be normal. So to your point, no, I wasn't ready, and I didn't even realize that and recognize it till years later, where I just thought, wow, I actually at many times was the emotionally unavailable person.
It's so interesting in hindsight. But at the time, you're like, I'm ready. And you do think that. You think you're ready. And it's
And you
just,
want it.
you want it more than anything. And like, I hope you don't mind that we're kind of going like this. That's how my
Oh,
brain
of
works.
course.
But it's something where, and I'm in my 30s, but it's something where I am feeling that pressure in a way that I have not felt it before. And
Mm,
I've been with my partner for years. We have a dog, we have a house, like we're so happy. And there'll be moments where I hear this voice in my head being like, you need to be married now. Like, what are you doing? You need to be married now. And I take a
mm,
step back and I'm like, am I happy in the relationship? Yes. Is this person committed to me? Yes. Is there in it? But it's only, and I know it's societal pressure. And I even work on this every day, and I, tell it to other people, but I still have to tell myself like that is societal pressure. You need to stop, get off of social media, stop
right.
looking at friends that just got engaged, but like take a step back and like, all often we romanticize other people's relationships where it's like, oh, they're married. You don't know where someone's happiness is. Some of the happiest couples that I know never end up getting married or never got married because they're like, we've been together for 15 years. We're good. Like, we don't want to. And there's always, and they still get told, my friends will be like, oh, is he ever going to propose? And they're like, no, we're married in our minds. Like, we just chose
Mm,
not to go down that like traditional path. But it's just interesting as I've gotten older that I still hear it and I have to kind of check myself.
And it's interesting that you say that. Yeah, because sometimes we do need to get off social media. Hashtag relationship goals. Okay, back away from Instagram, please. Just back away.
Don't even look up that
I know,
hashtag.
right?
Stay
But
away.
but the
There's
thing
a
is,
warning sign.
but you see, the thing is, a lot of people see that and they just think that's all there is. And it's like, hold on a second, you've literally had a 2-minute glimpse into a 24-hour day. That really isn't saying much. Um,
And the happy moments in that 24-hour day. I have been
exactly.
many a bridesmaid, and the number of times that a bride has looked at me and said, I just want this day to be over, I can't even count on, it'd be more than two hands.
Wow, that's
And
interesting,
yeah.
because I remember somebody that I used to be friends with. The amount of time she would call me crying about her marriage and her husband did this and her husband did that and her husband did the other. And the next thing you know, I see a picture on Instagram. I'm like, wait, what?
All the time.
I'm
And
like,
it's
huh? That doesn't even make sense. And
I
it's the point where I thought, you know something? Yes, I know there are happy times and happy moments in your marriage and all the rest of it, but it's weird. And I'm trying to find a more grown up
will something
counselor
where
therapist word than just weird, but just like you put in these things, you spend more time crying and talking to me than you do the happy moments. And I'm just thinking to myself, I said, you know something, you need to have a balance. I'm not saying that you're supposed to put all your dirty laundry on social media by
no,
means,
no.
but the way that it's always been portrayed, it's just like, oh, I thank God for my blessings and I thank God for my amazing husband. I'm like, hold on a second. When I look at the date and time of this, you were on the phone to me an hour before crying. What are you doing? And
Getting
so,
validation.
yeah,
She
and like,
needs validation.
yeah, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't put their happy moments on social media. I am not saying that by any means. I'm just saying that we shouldn't look at it and think that's all there is to it.
Yes, I 100% agree. And I will say, I believe there's been studies done that show that the more that couples post, like they tend to be unhappier, which isn't all, it depends also. You might, if you're an influencer, it's something where you need to kind of be constantly on social. But I know that when I was in an abusive relationship, I would post a happy picture and I might have been screamed at the night before. I might have been hit the night before. And it was something where I just did it to be like, oh, look, we're happy. It was like a validation, even for myself, I needed to remind myself, like, oh, like, look at this picture. Like, he can't be who he just was.
Interesting. Interesting. Because I must admit, I was never that person. I'm trying to think if I ever put a picture of my ex-husband and myself or any partner on social media. I don't think I ever have, to be honest.
That's not a bad,
I just, I'm
that's
actually struggling.
nothing.
I know there have been pictures, and a couple of times it's because he took my phone and he put them up, and I was not impressed. I just like,
Were
why
you emotionally unavailable in that one?
I just like, why are you doing that? But I don't even know if it was emotionally unavailable. I've never really been one person for putting a lot of my personal stuff on social media. If anybody was to look at my social media page, I think the last picture I put of myself, oh gosh, probably my birthday 2019 or something. I don't even know, because honestly, I don't really put much about my personal life or stuff on social media. Partly because I don't think anybody wants to hear it. But a lot of the times I just put, if I feel like putting an encouraging word or something inspirational on there. So it's not even that I'm emotionally unavailable. I'm more from the generation where we didn't have social media. Do you see what I mean? Because if you
Yes.
think, I mean, Carrie, I'm 50 in less than 6 months. So when social media, when I was coming up or whatever, I wasn't in that habit of selfies and posting and whatever. So I just never did. And again, I'm not saying that those people that do are wrong. It's just that I just never really understood it. And don't get me wrong, to be honest, I do like to sometimes when I do see happy couples, I'm like, oh, that's so cute. I see that and I do, but I just think I don't base what life should be and what relationships should be on just that, because I know that they probably sometimes have blazing arguments and disagreements, because it's not unhealthy to disagree and have an argument.
No, no. And I think it's all about how you argue. It's all about how you kind of communicate with each other. But no, to go back to that point, I think that's healthy. And I think now we're in this, I don't know. My heart aches for the generations below me that will never know anything other than social media. And I think so many people, and I don't want to go on a social media like rabbit hole because I could, but I think it has made dating harder. I think online dating has made it so easy to really just basically order a person. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and it's people yearn for connection. And I think it makes it harder to find it.
And it's funny that you said order a person, because being a 70s baby, it's I remember how we frowned upon the whole mail order bride thing. It was just like, and it really was frowned upon, and people didn't speak about it much. But now here we are with all the dating apps, and I tried one once. Oh my, I don't think I was on it for 24 hours. Some of the people that were coming at me, I'm just like, wait, excuse me, pardon.
I
Um,
It's,
like,
and I
like
will say, like, it works for some people.
it does, it
My
does. But the
best
people
friend
that were
met,
coming, making comments and sending me messages, like I said to you earlier, if I had pearls, I'd be clutching them at some of the things people were saying to me. I'm just like, somebody put into some the don't know this person from a can of paint, just freshly on this dating app. And he decided he wanted to talk about my lips in the picture. That I was just like, oh no, no.
that sounds PG compared to
Like,
what it could have
dude, I was like, dude, do you even know if that's my real picture or my real name? Like, seriously, behave yourself. Like I said, I didn't last not even 24 hours on this dating app because
been.
of just, and I just thought, those people that have done it and that have met someone and they're now in their happily ever after, God bless you. But it just wasn't for me. And like you said, being able to just order that person and somebody just coming at you in sometimes the most crudest, just absolute, just foul ways. And you're just thinking, if that works for you, then that's good. It doesn't work for me.
I always wondered that. Who does that work? What woman is like, I am so excited to receive this message.
Right. It's just like,
This is
yay, great.
what I wanted to hear tonight.
Yeah,
But no, it's
exactly. It's just
you.
like, right, thank you. Just like, no, but thank you, but no. And so to your point, a lot of the genuine connections are not there because we just go by, we pick up the phone, like, we pick up the phone and we're just like, what is it? Swipe left. So it goes to show how much I don't know, right? Swipe
It's
left.
swiping one way.
And then you look at this person and you read what they put. Anybody could have typed that. They could have taken it out of any book, or they could have put in their profile who the person that they wish they were.
Oh,
And then
100%.
and then we get involved. And unfortunately, I do know too many where they have gone on these dating sites because of all the glamorous things they've seen, and they've ended up with some completely emotionally unavailable person that is, I mean, some of the stories that I've heard from people I personally know of their experience of having gone through these dating sites and read this description, and then that genuine connection wasn't made because of the just interacting via emails and things like that, ended up getting married and found out that this person was still talking to all these other women on social media, was talking to I'm trying to think of, oh gosh, she told me that all these people and transsexuals and everything that he was talking to, and it's just like, okay, now if you had gone a different route and made that genuine connection, would you have married this person? Would you have been able to see some of these things in this person? And it's like you said, because we've just literally like gone on Amazon and ordered what I wanted to order. And you know what it's like. Do you remember? I've completely gone off topic a little here. When you could, these retailers were first putting clothes and stuff on Facebook, and we were ordered, the amount of things I ordered. I remember I ordered a dress. This would have been a dress for somebody that was maybe 4 foot. I'm 5'7". I'm just saying. And I'm not particularly big because in the US I'm a size 6, in the UK I'm a size 10. So it's not like I'm particularly big, and I couldn't fit in this thing because normally I buy a size small. And it's like the amount of things, and it's funny, I did a fashion show for my mum, and I put on this outfit, and then I pulled up the picture, says, this is what it is, this is what it should have been. And then I would go back and I would change. I'm like, this is what it is, this is what it should have been. And I did that with so many. And that's what some of these things remind me of. The person, this is who I got, this is who they said they were.
Yes, that is so true. I mean, I love that analogy. Oh my gosh, that is amazing. It's
I
like,
wish I'd taken pictures in some of these outfits, and thinking back on it, I wish I'd taken some pictures in these outfits, and then did a split screen side by side of this is what I ordered, this is what I got.
it's like on Pinterest, it'll be like reality versus Pinterest when you make something, but it's so true. And I think like you said, it does work for some people. Like my best friend actually met her soon to be husband, but she had to go on a lot of bad dates, and it was extremely taxing. And I think anything is, whether you're dating in real, like meeting someone in person or online, but she did go on a lot of dates that someone was emotionally unavailable, or she got ghosted a couple of times, or someone basically catfished her. And it was like a lot of work. And also it makes it very easy for narcissists or sociopaths or like abusers
To
to just
hide.
cycle through men or
Yeah.
women.
Yeah, and hide behind this whole profile.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's
date multiple
actually, yeah.
people.
And not only that, I think as well, because if we go to like when I started dating, pre these apps and dating sites, it's a case of, yes, the sociopaths and narcissists could hide behind it, but I think they were revealed much sooner. Whereas now, because we're able to really build up that emotional connection through words and calls and emails, I think it's like, it seems a lot harder for people to actually get out of these situations now, because that initial bond that was built became so strong.
Yeah.
Because emotional connections, there's a lot to be said for emotional connections, a lot to be said for that. Because if I remember a quote I heard once. It says, affairs don't start with sex.
No.
They start with that emotional connection. And I know, for example, in my case with my ex-husband, I got to find out that they were talking and messaging and communicating. And so it started from there, and it solidified what they had. Even though he and I were still married, I'm just like, okay, dude, thanks. But that's where it starts from. And it's interesting that we have this thing where we order a person and so many people are catfished. And if it was that great, we wouldn't be telling a lot of these young girls, be careful of who you meet on social media. So why then are we not telling ourselves these as adults? Be careful who you meet on social media.
We should.
Because
We
if
need to
you
parent ourselves
yeah,
about this.
and sometimes it's a case of, why are we so almost like desperately seeking it? What is missing in us? And um to ask that question, it's just like, can you tell me a bit more about how you began to do the work that you did to work through what you had gone through your past traumas? Because you said that you identified why you struggled with a lack of self-love and self-worth. And if you don't mind sharing, what was that detrimental wake-up call for you that forced you, because that, and I'm using your words, you said it forced you to realize that you had to make changes in order for your life to change? I
Yeah.
mean, what was it? What was that trigger for you?
So, and I know this is a pattern. Before I was in my detrimental last abusive relationship, I had been in several emotionally abusive, I wouldn't say 2 to 3 prior to that. It
Mhm.
just wasn't to this extent. So there was one where I realized, I'm like, okay, I'm being emotionally abused, and like identified it. I started looking online, figured out what was happening, and still ended up in another emotionally abusive situation. The last one, though, was where it got very physical, and where there was a moment when my narcissistic ex was driving, and he was going like 100 miles an hour, and he'd been drinking, and we were like going down these caverns. And I just had this moment where I thought to myself, I was like, I could eat, like I was gripping onto the handle or my car, and I was like, I could die right now. And I've never had that thought in my head with another person. And there was this manic like look in his eyes where I was like, he doesn't care if we die right now. And I realized that. And that was the most extreme moment, but there were several others. I ended the relationship, and I just realized, I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I started asking myself, I was like, why? Like, I was so down after that. I would say I was a very different person. I went into that relationship and I was very confident. I was very relatively self-assured. I was happy, and I came out so unconfident, not knowing who I was. And that's very common with victims of gaslighting and, invalidation. I came out and I was just like, who am I? So I started doing research and realized, one, I was extremely codependent, but not in the way. And I think a lot of people think of codependency and being like needy in the same vein. I was always very independent. So I thought, how can I be codependent if I'm so like, independent, like hardworking, like I do my own thing. But the reality is that I was codependent because I needed other people's validation, and whether that was friends or a relationship. So I ended up having a moment where I thought to myself, what do I want? And I realized, one, I don't want to be in the city I'm at. So I packed up with my best friend and moved to a new city, no place, no job, just moved, because I realized I was like, if I don't do it now, I'm not going to do it. I got an amazing therapist, and I'm a huge advocate for therapy. And I will say, I think I got very lucky because I immediately found a therapist that I just really connected with. We did extensive work for several years, and I realized that was a huge part of it. But then, and this is very common with trauma, I started having PTSD about a year after I left the narcissist. So I started having extreme, just like, kind of mental breakdowns. And I was like, what is happening to me? What is happening to me? And she said, this is normal. You've been in flight or fight for your basically whole life. And you've been jumping around doing this and that. And now that you're finally kind of facing everything, it's all hitting you at once. And it was a very, very, I'm gonna be honest, it was a horrible couple of years, because it was years of, past trauma from relationships, past trauma from like my family and growing up, and my, spiritual abuse, things like that. But I started working through that. And it was really when I identified like my patterns, when I started being able to heal. And I would say that realizing that the codependency was so huge was really, really pivotal or important for me. I think a lot of people, when they are in an abusive relationship, they tend to focus, and I'm guilty of this as well, they tend to focus on like the abuser. Why was he this way? Why did this happen? Like they go down, the narcissist rabbit hole, which is something I obviously like educate around, but also I always remind my clients, we need to focus on you. Like you're still like, your codependency is showing because you're focusing on the narcissist, right? I'm like, or the abuser, or you're like emotionally unavailable ex. You're trying to figure out what makes them the way they are instead of figuring out what makes you the way you are. So I started doing that. And then it just, it's always ongoing. I feel like I'm definitely in the best place I've ever been in, but it's always a journey healing from trauma. I don't really think trauma ever goes away. To be honest, I think it's something that you work through, you kind of come to terms with, you heal from it, but it's part of you. It makes you who you are. It was part of your life. But I also ended up, and this is kind of ties into what I said earlier. After I did that, so I did that for a couple of years. Like I was Miss Independent, like single, working on myself. And I did end up meeting my now partner. And I was still going through like a lot of the trauma when I met him. And this ties into what we talked about, baggage. He was very understanding. I'm very blessed with his understanding. I don't know if you follow like attachment styles, but he's very secure, very stable, normal. His family's great. Like it checks all the boxes. And then I come in as just, codependent, crying, recovering from abuse, just kind of mess on the floor. And I still managed to work on myself and heal in the beginning of our relationship, but it's something where it went very slow. I still I set boundaries for myself. For example, we didn't move in right like until I think 2.5 years of dating. We didn't live together. And it's something where old me, after, my lease was up after a year, I would have been like, love, let's do this. But I didn't. And I thought to myself, and I really took the time to evaluate my needs. And I thought, you know what? I want to live with my best friend for another year. I'm loving life. I'm working on myself. And he respected that. An unhealthy, person may have been like, you don't love me. You don't want to live together, this and that. But it worked out. And that's something where I remember my friends being like, this is new Carrie. like old Carrie, after 2 months would have been like, it's love, let's do this, let's jump in head first and come out, like tangled at the bottom. But it was really all encompassing. And it's just something that I always advocate for therapy. But a huge thing was really just figuring out like my childhood, what my attachment style was, what like the fact that I was codependent, and researching, learning about those behaviors, so that now when I feel myself experiencing it, I can identify what it is and like work through it instead of just reacting or spiraling, for lack of a better word.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that the length of time you were in therapy, because I'm sure that many people have gone to therapy and after 4, 5, 6 sessions, like, it's not working.
Or like, they think they're healed.
It's like, firstly, it took you years to get into this. It's not going to take you 6 weeks to get out. Let's just be real here. And I think so many people have missed a trick because it takes longer than they think, because part of it in my mind is I don't think people just realize just how much is there that needs to be worked through, because it's years and years and years of stuff, for want of a better expression, just years of stuff to wade through. Yeah, to work through. So thank you for mentioning that it took you a couple of years with a great therapist to do that. And as you mentioned, and even after that, there was still work that needed to be done. It's not a quick fix, is it?
No, there's no quick fix. And it's something where anyone that's, I think, a coach or therapist should still see a therapist. As far as I know, therapists are required to see other therapists, as far as like, like you sometimes need to check in with yourself.
Yeah.
And it's ever ongoing, but I think it's something where you also get what you put into it. I love the book Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. I just love her. But I know there's a part where she talks about how therapists have certain types of patients. And, there's the one that comes in like, and they're willing to kind of work on themselves. And then there's the ones where they come to therapy and they're talking, but they're not hearing anything. They're closed off. They're not receptive. And it gets to a point where, some therapists will be like, I can't help you until you're ready to be helped. And I think that plays into it as well.
Yeah, and that is actually the sign of a good therapist, that they will look at it and recognize that it's just like, something, when you're ready. I'm not quite sure why when you're fully ready, because some people think, I need to do something, let me go and see a therapist. And then when they get there now, they're still like closed off.
Well, and they're like, okay, fix me.
Yeah, exactly. Just like, you have to do something too in order to be fixed. It is actually a two-way thing. And I think some people put all the emphasis on the therapist, for the therapist to fix them. But one thing that I always say, I'm like, listen, unless you are ready to acknowledge and be prepared to do the work, it's not going to work, because it does take work. And it's not somebody else's responsibility to fix, for want of a better expression, it's your responsibility to do the work on yourself with the help of your therapist. And I think that's where people get it twisted. They expect the therapist to just come in, like you said, okay, I'm here, I've shown up, fix me now, fix me, I'm ready to be fixed. It's like, yeah, fix your own self. I'm going to help you fix your own self.
We're still looking for that knight in shining armor
in the form of a therapist. We've literally just changed the title of who, or the job of who that knight in shining armor is, haven't we? We've just changed it from the partner to the therapist. But your therapist isn't really your knight in shining armor. Your therapist is more, you're the knight in shining armor. Your therapist is more the horse underneath you that's going to help you get there to fight what you need to fight. And that's where it's like, people, let's not get it twisted. Your therapist is not going to wave a magic wand and all of a sudden you're going to be like, ta-da, I'm emotionally available now, I'm ready. It doesn't work that way.
Love that analogy.
And so that's where you come in as a relationship coach, right? Because part of what you do, and if you can speak to that, is people that need to work on their self-awareness and how to learn how to navigate relationships in their life and to create boundaries. Because a lot of the times, isn't that where the issues come in? We, like you said before, you didn't have any boundaries because, listen, you weren't closed off. You were the opposite. Everything free for all, just everything come in.
Everything comes in, literally. You let everything in. But yes, so I primarily work with victims of narcissistic abuse. It's now expanded to more just general, relationship coaching. But the majority of my clients, I work with both men and women. Actually, the majority are men. But they come to me after a relationship. Normally, when someone, if they're still with their abuser or they're still with a narcissist or someone, they aren't at a place where they're ready for coaching, they'll normally reach out to me. And it's so interesting because they'll reach out to me, we'll kind of talk, and they'll be like, okay, I'm not ready. And then, 3 to 6 months later, they'll have their first session. So it's really a process of, you're really like gaining trust from that point. But a lot of people similar to yourself will find my writing. And that's the majority of how they find me. They'll find my writing, something will resonate, they'll reach out, we'll kind of talk off and on. And then they'll get to a place where they're like, okay, I left my abuser or I left the relationship, I'm ready. And some of them, it's a situation where it's years later and they're ready to start dating again. And they have no idea where to start. I worked with someone and he was like, Carrie, I'm 50. Like, I haven't, I'm dated. I was married once. Like, I don't even know how to navigate this landscape and I don't even know if I'm ready. So it's kind of like coaching through that, working through the past trauma, working on healing, but everyone has to be ready at the end of the day. And it's something where I have been in a situation where I will tell someone, I'm not going to take you on as a client until you do X, Y, Z, because it's not going to be beneficial for you. And I don't want to waste your time. I also have to be very careful because a lot of abusers or narcissists will try to stalk their exes through my pages or through my mediums. And I have to be very careful for my privacy as well. And for my clients. So it's something where if they're still talking to their ex, I'll coach them through it, but I'm very careful and I'm hesitant to take on those clients. So I would say the majority, I would say 99% of my clients are people who have ended their relationship. They need to start setting boundaries. Perhaps their ex is still trying to get back with them or trying to contact them. And they're like, hey, like, how do I cut this off? How do I start healing? Why did I end up in this relationship? Why do I continue to end up in these kind of relationships? And how can I change these patterns? And then we start working from there. And I do derive a lot of it. I have a background in behavioral health. I derive a lot of it from personal experiences because it's something where you can be, you can get certified. And it's a therapist obviously is not as easy as it is to become a coach. There's a lot of coaches out there, as you've probably seen. Yeah. It's something where I derive it from my personal experience. And I was talking to another coach that I really admire. She's very big in like the narcissistic abuse, like survival and healing community. And I kind of asked her when, I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago. And I asked her, like, how did you kind of get to where you are? And she was like, honestly, 99% my own experiences. And I think it's something where I don't want to share too much, but at the end of the day, I put a lot in my writing and a lot of people do come to me and they know about my relationship. And I tell them, I'm like, this is about you. This isn't about me, but it is very, I think, bonding in a way that we've gone through the same things. And there's moments where they'll tell me a story and they'll be like, you're smiling. And I'm like, it's verbatim what I went through. Or I will finish their sentence and I'll be like, they said this. And they're like, oh my gosh. But it makes, you feel less alone when you've gone through something like that.
No, absolutely. And that's one of the things in my own coaching practice, as a life coach. Many of the people have said to me, or many of my clients have said to me that they felt comfortable knowing that because I have gone through certain things and I've shared and I've been very transparent and open, they feel that they now can come to therapy, come to coaching and be coached from a non-judgmental place because I share what I've gone through. And like yourself, I say to them, look, I've done mine. you need to do yours, and I'm helping you to do yours. Like you said, it's not about me, but in order sometimes to break those walls and those barriers down so that they can start to open up, they need to know that, look, I'm not just here because I went and I studied and I took some exams. I went through a lot of stuff prior and took some of those courses and exams and got those qualifications as a result of what I went through to be able to help others. So I'm not coming to you from a place of head knowledge or book knowledge. I'm coming to you from a place of heart knowledge. I'm coming to you from a place of experience, because I've walked some of the paths that you guys have walked. So to your point, I think sometimes it is very important to share and be transparent as a coach, so that people, because I remember, sorry, I'm just changing for a little bit there. I went to a therapist many years ago. I attempted suicide. And one of the stipulations was I had to go and see a therapist. And there were two that I went to see. The first one, it was your very stereotypical room where it had the couch and it had the comfy chair and then it had the box of tissues. And she says, the first thing she said is, so tell me, what was the relationship like with your parents? And it's funny because there's a gif of Viola Davis that goes around where you see her pick up her bag and do this.
No,
that
exactly.
was me. That, seriously, hold on.
Didn't even try to make a connection with you.
This was me. And I was gone, seriously. And so when I see that gif of Viola Davis, I'm like, yeah, been there, done that. Seriously, that was the first thing. So what was the relationship like with your parents? And that was my picked up my handbag and I was just like, exit stage left, right? I was just like, hello? No. Then I went to another therapist. And I know this is going to sound awful, but he was very much like, you could like he was this older white man, had a hearing aid in both ears. And he looked like this man has had no life experience at all. He looked like he'd lived the most sheltered life, grew up in the local Methodist church, wearing that kind of like
Collared.
Like a shirt, but when they wear like those V-neck type like sweater jumpers over it, yes. very, very. And I went in there, and this man, didn't really say anything. I don't even remember if he even introduced himself. And it was a weird kind of room, because it was the kind of room where the chairs were like classroom chairs. So there's nothing comfy. There was no get comfy in this room, right? And so he sat in a chair opposite me and I sat down, and he with his notes and whatever. And we just looked at each other for about a minute or two. And I just thought, I'm just going to say anything. And I did. Just said anything. I don't know if anything I said it was even true. I just made up some fascinating, and this man looked more fascinated and in awe of what I was saying to him than actually establishing whether or not, and if there was any truth or credibility. And I thought, this is, to be honest, it was actually funny for me. So the next session I went back and I did the same thing. Sometimes I gave scenarios from some program I watched that week or whatever, and just something salacious and, fantastic. And then went back for the third session and I did the same thing. And then when it came time for the fourth session, I'm like, oh, you know what, this is boring. And I never went back. Seriously, I'm bored. I'm because the way that he was there, he just looked so fascinated and enraptured and enthralled by the stories I was telling him of my life. And I'm thinking, dude, half of the stuff I'm telling you isn't even me. It's something I watched.
He didn't ask any questions.
None whatsoever. None. So I just like, yeah, but no, yeah, this isn't for me. So those are the first two times I tried therapy. And so I thought, I can't coach from a place like that, because I know that experience. So part of me going back to kind of a very long story short, going back to what you were saying about from a place of experience, having been there with people that are just like, I don't even know what they were expecting. And I'm just like, I didn't feel comfortable or confident is the word, that there would have even have been a helpful outcome as a result of these two therapists that I went to see, especially when one, I think I could have been talking to him about some kind of Marvel comic for all he knew, like seriously. But
And he would have just been enthralled. But
yeah,
that's such a great point, because one, I'm glad you didn't give up after having those two experiences with your therapist for the first time. But it's also one of those things where everyone's going to connect with different people. And
mm,
it's something where I'm not going to be the right coach for everyone.
hmm,
Like, it's just something where there's a reason why there's so many different niches and so many different personalities. People are going to find who they connect with. And it's okay to, for lack of a better word, like shop around until you actually really find that therapist or coach that you connect with. And it's something where if you don't, and you want to be challenged though. So I don't want to say like, oh, your therapist made you look at, face something, or your coach brought up something you run away, but it's something where you need to have a genuine connection with them.
absolutely.
Very
Yeah.
personal.
Yeah, no, that's true, because there's going to be so much that comes out of it that is reliving a trauma, so much of your experiences that you have to share. And you don't want to be going through and doing all of that kind of really heavy emotional work only to feel like you're talking to a brick wall, or somebody that's more fascinated by, because you could really see in their head that they're saying, wow, as you're talking, as opposed to somebody that's going to help you unpack and go away with the necessary tools you need to continue to move forward. Because again, something else that you coach on is giving people the examples of behaviors that they should not tolerate in a healthy relationship. Because to be honest, do some of us even know what some of those behaviors are that we shouldn't tolerate? Do we? Because we might be the ones that are perpetrating these behaviors anyway.
Oh, 100%. I've been the toxic one in my relationships. Like, and it's something where we're not taught the small, like the behaviors that we shouldn't tolerate. Because like I said, I think we're taught, don't let someone hate you. We're not taught something where jealousy can be a red flag,
Yeah.
where moving too fast is a red flag, where, too much affection is a red flag. And it's something where I think at times it's easy to be like, oh, red flag, I'm running away. But it's like, no, you need to, there's also yellow flags. It's like someone might exhibit behaviors where you're like, I'm feeling a little iffy. But what you need to do is keep an eye out for that and
Mhm.
then move forward. And it's something where, is that person willing to work on it? I just think that it's such a fine line. And I think of this recently. I'm quite active on TikTok. I actually love it. There's like a huge community there for narcissistic like abuse and survivors and coaches, which I never would have thought when I found it like a year and a half ago. But I posted something recently where I was talking about, I think it was signs that you should like possibly move on from your relationship, or that like, it's not healthy. And some of the comments were people being like, she's advocating for divorce and grass is greener syndrome and this and
Oh,
that. And I thought to myself, and I like did a response, and it's something where with social media, you always get people like that. For me, I'm like, okay, good. It's just causing my post to trend more, controversy sells, it does.
yeah.
But it's something where I thought to myself, I'm like, the issue isn't normally that people are jumping from relationship to relationship. It's that people stay far past the expiration date. They
Mm,
stay and I said, as a reminder, a relationship isn't supposed to make you miserable. Yes, you're going to have fights. Yes, they're going to be dates. It's never going to be perfect, but it should enhance your life.
yeah.
It should not make you miserable. And people stay so far past the expiration date, in my opinion, and from what I've seen.
Yeah, but a little off topic is, I think, especially when I look at when I was going through the breakup of my first marriage and going through divorce, a lot of it was I felt ashamed. I felt embarrassed. I felt like a failure because we hadn't been married very long. And so there were all these other things that were coming up on as to Why? Because when he first was saying, "Oh, I don't love you anymore and I don't want to be married," literally out of the blue, and I was like, okay, where did that come from? And I know it wasn't a case of he woke up one day and felt that way. It
Yeah.
happened over time, but I think it was just the way he did it. And so it was a case of, I thought, right, let's go and see a therapist. Let's try and change things. Let's try and work at it. Let's try and do this. Let's try and do this. And it was because I think I was trying to fight and hold on to something that I pretty much knew was dead. Because, especially because he eventually said, because I remember I said to him, I said, "Did you try?" And he's like, "Yeah, I did." A few weeks later, he came and says, if I'm honest, I didn't try. I'm like, yeah, I know. That's why I even asked the question to start with, but okay. And so the fact that he wasn't even willing or prepared to try really should have just been a thing where, you know, something, Alison, just knock it on the head, call it a day. But because I felt, and it's just like, was I more fighting to keep my marriage, or was I fighting to keep shame out of my eye, basically? And it was the latter. I was ashamed. I was embarrassed that it's come to divorce. So to your point, a lot of people try and hold on to things for all manner of reasons. Again, because that was my internal pressure, but then you've got people with the internal pressure, and then again you've got the external pressure, because like yourself, I was brought up in church. I was brought up in a very strict denominational church. I no longer go to that church. I am still a minister and I still go to church. However, when you mentioned spiritual abuse, I thought that was quite interesting, because there also can be that when we are force fed dogma,
Yeah.
as opposed, do you know what I mean? And so you could still be a Christian, you can still have your faith without it being what we grew up to
Yes.
know. You still have your relationship with God, right? So you can have that, but then you've got that external pressure. And I know you've got, like, for example, if you're in the church and things like that, there's that pressure there, because I grew up in a church where they says no, in the part in the Bible, like, God doesn't like divorce. So
Yeah.
because of that, people stayed in stuff and they didn't get divorced, when they're just like, okay, a little bit out of context. So, but you just teach it in its entirety. So there's so many things why people stay. And unfortunately, it's a case of when they do start to step out, again, some of those pressures try to pull them back and hold them there.
Yeah. And it's so heartbreaking because ultimately it's almost never about happiness. Like if you
Mm.
ask someone, and I've asked friends or, clients that have stayed in unhealthy or unhappy relationships, like I've always asked this question that was like, what do you like about them? Or what makes you happy? And most of the time they'll be like, I don't have an answer for that. I'm
Oh,
like, and it's just like I think shame plays into it so much. It's like, I don't, people came to our wedding. I have to post on social media, or I have to, people are going to know. And it's like, you're prioritizing everything else except your happiness. Not
and
even, yeah.
that is true, because, for example, afterwards, do you know how long it took me to take off my wedding and engagement ring? Do you know how long it took me to, because I just thought, I'm not ready for the finger to be naked. That's what exactly the words I used. I'm not ready for the finger to be naked. And and not only that, it's just then, and even things like my changing my name on social media, because the truth is it took ages for me to start using my married name on social media. And then when I did, everybody's just like, yay. And then it was a case of changing it again, and then in my head,
You
like,
want to elicit a reaction. You're like, I
people
don't
are just,
want the reaction.
yeah, because I'm just thinking, people are going to know, and what are they going to say, and what are they going to think? And it was really that. And then it just got to the stage where I'm just like, something, Alison, just do it. Just do it. It doesn't matter, because eventually people will stop talking about it and get over it anyway. But I had to give myself that talking
Yes.
to be
Oh,
able to do that. So, to your point, it's just like, and then when I think about it, there were some behaviors that, were there red flags from the very beginning? Absolutely, there were. Yeah, I should. However, when you think you're in love, you put up with certain behaviors, don't you? Because you think you can live with it. You think you can deal with it. You think you can handle it. And I heard somewhere once, it says a lot of those behaviors that you that caused you to think something in the beginning, many times are the ones that end up driving you apart. Don't ignore them.
No. And it's something where I think people should go in a relationship and take that person exactly as they are. Be like, what if like this person never changes? And I think people, you want someone to obviously grow and evolve, but so many people go into a relationship and they're like, oh, they'll quit smoking, or they'll, it's like seemingly small things where it's like, oh, this might be like, I advocate for people to have deal breakers, and that's okay. Like, I personally like the moment I started setting deal breakers is when I started dating people that were actually healthy people, because it was like, I won't tolerate XYZ. And I think it's easy to be like, oh, well, then you're being, stuck up, or you're not letting certain people in. When in reality, it's like, if you don't set deal breakers, how are you going? You're going to let everyone in. And
Yeah, and
it's healthy.
yeah, and the thing is, another word for deal breakers is boundaries.
Boundaries.
Come on, people. It's just called you're setting a boundary. And we have to have boundaries because I mean, think about it. We have boundaries at work. They're called the employee handbook.
You work for a healthy company, yes.
Well, there is that. Yeah, but do you see what I mean? So therefore, and we have, but there are boundaries in so many things. Like that's why we have laws. There are boundaries. So therefore, it stands to reason and logic almost that we would have that in our relationships as well, because we don't live, well, I was going to say this, but thinking about it, but be careful. I was about to say we don't live in a lawless society, but I'm not so sure.
We'll see how long it works out though, without any boundaries.
Right. But the point is they're called boundaries. We need to have healthy boundaries in our lives, not just in our intimate relationships, but again, in our friendships as well. And you also mentioned about coaching people that could be worried that they may be in a narcissistic or emotionally abusive relationship. Can you, and I know it's going to look different for everybody, but can you give us like a general overview of what that could potentially look like with narcissistic behavior? Because with narcissistic behavior, there are certain specific traits, aren't there?
Yes. So what I tell people to look out for is primarily, one is, what was the beginning of the relationship like? Did it move very fast? Was there a lot of affection? Were there, words of affirmation, them telling you they loved you right away? And then did the relationship change? Did that person start devaluing you? Did they start saying things they didn't like about you? Did they start controlling you? With narcissists, a lack of empathy is a huge thing as well. I could go down a whole rabbit hole because there's different types of narcissism. There's ones who are more covert, which means they're going to be more introverted and shy, which I think is actually the most dangerous, because it's not the typical, we think of, a loud, grandiose narcissist in our head, whereas coverts are going to be more, that insecurity is going to be at the root of things. But also, another thing is, how do you feel in the relationship? A lot of people, if you're dating a narcissist, is going to be very surface level. It's going to be all about them. You're normally going to lose all confidence, because you have to think there's going to be years of gaslighting and invalidation, to the point where you'll start to question who you are. You're going to feel like you're not good enough. Your partner is going to be very superior. It's so many different things, but normally someone will start questioning, am I with a narcissist, when they start realizing that the person they're with isn't matching. Like, it's almost like two different people, because there'll be this mask of, I think you mentioned that you dated someone where it's like, it was so great in the beginning, and that starts to kind of fade away. And then at a certain point, there'll be infidelity, because narcissists usually won't stay with the same person forever. They'll normally get bored, once they've sucked out the life basically of their supply. and they'll move on. So at the end, it's like this devaluing, they'll be discarded. So they'll be like, oh, my partner left me. He came back. He's seeing other people. And they'll just tolerate, and I've done it as well, where you just tolerate the most horrible behaviors, but it's because you've gone down this long path. So normally I ask them, if you're unconfident, you feel like you don't know who you are, you struggle to voice your opinions, you're probably dating a narcissist. And I'll like,
interesting you should say that, because something that just came to mind is, and I wrote about it in my first book, Broken Pieces Behind the Mask. And that same person that I mentioned, I found out after quite some time, where all this time I thought I was the girlfriend, I was the side chick. And I was like, how? Because you're with me every day, you leave my home, because he told me he lived in one area of London with his mother, and I'd been to the home with the mother and everything, but then because I had my own place, it was a case of, let's just chill by me, because I'm not trying to bump into your mum at 3 o'clock in the morning on my way to the bathroom kind of thing, so we'll just stay by me, right? Because it's a little bit embarrassing. You got a little towel wrapped around you. I'm like, oh, morning. I wasn't trying to do that.
Let's just avoid that. Yeah.
So we'll just spend time by me. And then I found out, no, I didn't find out. He eventually told me, but after a long enough period of time that I was smitten hook, line and sinker, that, oh, by the way, I don't live in this area in my mum. I live in this other area with my girlfriend and her son. I'm like, wait, what? Excuse me? Like, huh? How? Because you're with me every day. And he would leave my home at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm thinking he's just going home, check on mom's, make sure she's okay, because he had clothes, everything by me. Whenever there was an event or somewhere to go, he's taking me. Everybody where he worked knew me. So I'm thinking, how is that even possible that you're actually living with somebody and her child? And so after a while, so for a while, I was in denial. I didn't believe it. I didn't accept it. So it continued. But then I noticed his behavior started to change. So for example, one of the things he would do now is when his mobile phone rang, and this was in the days pre-caller ID. So when his mobile rang, what he would do, he would put on the radio, go by the radio and answer it to make it sound like he was in his car with the radio playing. And I'm like, boy, you just got up out of my bed. Seriously, he would get up out of beds and hello. And I noticed things like that, because it was almost like, now that it's been such a long period of time where he and I were together before he told me the truth, and now he's told me the truth, the behavior changed. He was more able to relax into who he really was. And I think I let that go on for a couple of years, if I'm honest. And then it got to the point where I remember I said to him, this love triangle can't continue. This whole you, me, and she thing has to end. I can't do this. And I remember I said to him, you go and work it out with her. I'm going to remove myself from this equation. You see, I don't do ultimatums and tantrum. I'm like, no, I will just go. That is my MO. Alison has left the building, right? Because I'm not doing that. And so I remember I got all of his things together and I packed them all up. And this was after, this was the first time we broke up, and packed them all, put them all together and everything. And about 2 weeks later, he came to me and he said, it's me and you, babe. I love you. Just give me a few weeks.
Back.
Yeah, just give me a few weeks to sort everything out. And I'm like, sort everything out like what? And then because found out she was living in his home, so then she needed to sort out somewhere for her and her son to live. And I thought, you know what, that's fair enough. Because he's not just going to put her out on the street. She's got a child, and that was the case. And then I found out, so I thought, I'm not going to know if he's changed until I give him the opportunity to show me, right? Yeah. So I let him back in, gave him the space and the time to sort everything out. Then I noticed that, so why are we still spending all the time by me? Where do you live? You live somewhere? He took me to his house. I lived in a studio apartment. He had a 4-bedroom home that he now lived in by himself, because I was there. And believe me, I'm going through cupboards to make sure there's no trace. Right? So yeah, and he lived in there by himself. I'm like, so why are we spending all the time at my studio apartment if you have this house? Then that doesn't make any sense. But we still, that still continued. And then we broke up again, because I just thought, I'm not liking how this is going, because I'm seeing you less. And he's like, yeah, that's because I now have to do everything myself, whereas she would do things around the house, and he had his own business. So I'm like, oh, okay, I kind of get that. But if we were together, you wouldn't have to do everything by yourself, because I'd be there. But I thought, okay. So then we split up again. Then we got back together again. And then this time he starts talking about us getting married, and he starts talking about us going to Jamaica to get married. And this is verbatim. We're going to go to Jamaica, get married, and then we can eventually have a couple of curly haired little bastards.
Oh, man.
If that's what you're going to be calling my children, guess who's not having children with you? Because he had 3 children before he and I met by 3 different women, right? And so when he said all of that, and I just thought, yeah, but no. And then, because we had started to go through this whole thing of honesty, because after he broke up with the woman he was living with, I started to ask him questions about all of his previous relationships. And to your point about narcissists, I got to find out, what I learned was every relationship he had been in had overlapped.
Yep.
Every single one had overlapped. And when he told me that, and I thought, hold on, and you want to marry me? And my words to him were, if you haven't been faithful in any relationship before me, what makes me so special? I had to ask that question.
What do you say?
I don't even remember, because I don't think I was listening.
No. I think that question was for yourself.
Yeah, because the thing is, when he and I met, I was 21 and he was 33.
Okay.
And we'd been together so by the time we were having this conversation, he was now just before 40 and I was coming up to 30. So I'm looking at it and I'm thinking to myself, I don't know if that's a horse I'm willing to take the gamble on, if I'm honest, because it wasn't just like once or twice. There were numerous.
Yeah.
Where they all overlapped. And I got to find out a couple of these women were people that I had known. I'm like, and I've known pretty all my life, grew up with them. I'm like, oh my gosh, seriously. So to your point about narcissists not being faithful and the behavior changing, I never saw him as a narcissist before, until start years down the line and looking at and becoming a coach and looking at some of these behaviors. And I thought, my gosh, classic
Oh,
narcissistic behavior.
they can never be alone. They have supply lined up. And it's something where, yeah, he would have repeated the same patterns. I guarantee if he's around, he still is. It just continues. And it's something where that's another thing where every story is this. And that's why you're telling me this story. And I think to anyone who hasn't experienced this behavior, they'd be like, oh my gosh. And I'm just like, yeah, sounds about right.
Right.
Typical. It's just something where it's usually, but I'm just happy that you were able to see that, because a lot of times what I hear is, we were married for 20 years. I thought everything was fine. And then I found out our entire marriage, he had 3 mistresses, or she had 3 mistresses or mistress.
Oh.
And it's something where it constantly, they're able to live that double life. They're so good at lying as well. So it's something where you don't even, and you're also going into it trusting them. So you're not necessarily looking until later on for those lies. And then it kind of starts, you see it all unravel.
Yeah.
It's so heartbreaking, but it's unfortunately it's time and time again, it's the same story.
It is. And the funny thing is, because when I met him, it was 2 months after my 21st birthday. And as I mentioned to you, I grew up in a very strict Pentecostal home. And the guys that I had kind of dated before that, they were also from that same denomination church. So we all had the same background, and they were really, really good guys that I had dated. And so I wasn't used to, never been exposed to somebody that didn't grow up in the church and had a whole different kind of background and way of living and being. And I remember, and at the time I thought it was strange that I should ask this question, but I do remember that he and we were out to eat. And just out of the blue, I said to him, "Are you single?" Now, previously, before that, I would never have asked that question because I would have made the assumption that the fact that you're pursuing me, you must be single. But for this one time, and I couldn't understand why I asked, but I'm very grateful I did. I said, "Are you single?" And he said to me, "Yes." And that's when he proceeded to say, "I live in this area with my mother." So I'm like, "Oh, okay." And in my mind, I'm thinking, you've got no reason to lie to me. So of course I was going to trust him.
Yeah.
Only to find out it was all a lie.
And I think that's something where it's so hard to come to that realization that someone could do that. I think that's what we often, especially if you grow up in a religious, I think, or spiritual upbringing, you think everyone's good. And I think that also sets you up. You're not really taught, like, there are people out there who want to manipulate you and who don't have your best intentions in mind. And I think knowing that and teaching that is so important, because if you would have been taught that and I would have been taught that, we would have gone into those interactions a little differently or a lot differently.
But yeah, and talking of that, going into interactions differently, and part of what you coach is you help people to cultivate, and you give them this tips to cultivate stronger relationships and work through past traumas and help them like start growing towards like self-growth and self-love. And again, what does that look like? And as I've mentioned before, it's not a one size fits all. It's not going to be look the same for everybody. But what are the things that if somebody was saying, "Is this me? Is this not me?" What could you say to somebody that could give them some of those tips to start building stronger, healthier relationships, not with just with other people, mind you, because too many times we get it twisted that we think we just need to build stronger, healthier relationships with other people, but also with ourselves.
Yeah. One thing that I always hone in on is focusing on how someone makes you feel. I will ask my clients to go back through their previous relationships and kind of identify the toxic behaviors. But I'll give you an example. I was working with a client and we were talking about how she was afraid that she would never feel the way she did with her ex narcissist, in the sense of, and I don't know if you went through this, but I know I did, is that almost like love at first sight, Cupid's arrow excitement. And I told her, and I said, "You know what?" I said, "I don't want you to ever feel that again. And I think you need to write down like what came after that, because that's you. If you feel that again, you should run." Like, that's not normal. Like, a healthy relationship doesn't start instantly. I don't believe that you just fall in love at first sight. I think you can be attracted to someone. I think there can definitely be sparks, but it's something where I'm like, okay, like, let's look at those behaviors and let's see how you feel. Because I think we also I think our intuition tells us so many things, and we'll look back at relationships and be like, "Oh, I should have listened to this and that or that." And we knew things and we didn't ignore it. So another important thing is listening to your intuition. So when someone goes on that first date, I'll ask them, "Okay, I want you to walk me through it. Let's walk through the behaviors and let's go through how you felt." Because I think we'll often just overlook things and we'll think, "Oh, I need to give them a second chance," or, this is fine. When at the end of the day, we instantly start putting someone else first instead of looking at ourselves. So it's like, yes, part of it does mean you need to work on yourself, but you're also going to meet people who aren't right for you. And you're going to meet people who are toxic. So it's like, you can work on yourself, but you also need to make sure that you're only letting in someone who is healthy and has worked on themselves.
That is true. That is true. And going back to what you were saying before, but there's, especially the older you get, I believe the older you get, the higher the likelihood and the probability is that you're going to have gone through something that may make you a little bit guarded or wary. But to your point, it's also a case of we need to look at those flags, look at some of these things, and make sure that we understand that there is no perfection. Nobody is perfect. Nobody's going to be perfect. And again, the older we get, the more we're going to be wounded. But recognize and make sure that you're with somebody that who, if they have gone through some stuff, they are open and have already, if not, if they haven't already considered it, have already done some work on themselves so that their healing can be started or in progress, or they're going, you know, they've gone through it. But the dangerous thing, I believe, is somebody that just doesn't want to look at or acknowledge that I need to do some work on me so that I bring a healthier me into this relationship or my next one.
I agree for both people involved, because it's like you want to work on yourself and present your best version, but the other person has to do the same because you deserve that as well. It's like you shouldn't have to do all the work and then go into a relationship and that person's like, okay, you're great. It's like, okay, but what are you doing? How are you working? Like mental health is extremely important. What are you doing on your end? And I think the more that we can have those kind of conversations, the better relationships are going to be and the better communication is going to be. And I just love that mental health is becoming a topic of conversation more than it's ever been, because we're setting up success for a future generation where hopefully these kind of relationships can be avoided.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's great. And Carrie, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you talking to me today. So what is next for Carrie? What's next in the works and the pipeline for you?
Goodness. Well, as you know, as you found me, I am highly active on Medium. I have a blog up. It's still in progress. I'm working so that in the next few weeks, clients will be able to book directly with me. Okay. And then I'm also working on an ebook. I'm trying to have out, my goal is to have it out in the next 2 months. So we know how deadlines come with writing, but it's on my top 10 tips for healing from narcissistic abuse.
Oh, nice, nice. Please keep us posted of when that's released. I'd love to read it and share it. So, Carrie, anybody looking for a relationship coach to go through the healing and work through some of the topics that we've covered, where can they find you?
They can find me through my website, which is mycarriewynn.com. CarrieWynn. And then I'm also active on Instagram and TikTok. The majority, but I would say the easiest way would be to just contact me through my blog, and then we can set up a session from there. Should be easier in the future, but I would say I tend to check email the most out of all the social mediums I'm on.
Okay, great stuff. Carrie, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you and learning from you and sharing with you. Thank you so much for joining us here on Conversations with Alison J, The Journey to Here. Thank
you so much, Allison. It was great connecting with you.
Thank you so much. Take care now.
You as well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.